I want to explain to you the Biolabs stuff because I've been talking about it a little bit here and there. The QAnon folks have latched onto it in large part because of some of what Tucker Carlson is saying about the biolabs, and so I've done my homework. And I want to explain this all to you so you understand what actually is going on. Now, I want you to notice a pattern here. I'm not talking about people who believe the election's stolen. Make sure you understand. I'm not talking about people who believe the election is stolen. I'm talking about the people who believe the election was stolen because the Venezuelans, the Iranians, and the Chinese hijacked electronic voting machines. There are some people who believe that the electronic voting machines were rigged to throw the election to Joe Biden. Much of that comes from disinformation, a lot of it peddled by Sidney Powell and others who are all being sued in court now for making those claims that were not true. Regardless of whether you think the election was stolen or not, the electronic voting machines had nothing to do with it. Now, was there fraud? Was there ballot stuffing? Was there ballot harvesting? We can discuss those things. Well, I don't really want to. I'm just saying they're up for discussion. But what really isn't up for discussion is that the electronic voting machines were somehow rigged to throw the election. But the people who believe the voting machine aspect of it are also some of the loudest voices now that Vladimir Putin is justified for invading Ukraine because the United States is operating bioweapons laboratories. And you should note how willing some people are, some of your fellow Americans are, to grab hold of, glom onto, and use Russian disinformation to vilify their own country. Some Americans' contempt for the United States is so strong, they would rather believe Russian lies than believe the truth. You do need to note that. And let me say out of the gate, I'm not talking about Tucker Carlson here. We'll get into Tucker here in a little bit. I want to give you the full and complete picture, though, because you need to understand it, because I assure you this is going to come up, because, crazy is unleashed at times like this. And you're gonna get it from people, and they're going to be convinced, and they're going to have little facts, and everybody takes a little kernel of truth, and they make a conspiracy theory out of it. I want to explain this one to you, though. In 1990, the Soviet Union began to collapse, and there was a problem. The Soviet Union, throughout Eastern Europe and territories of the former Soviet Union, they had a bunch of bioweapons laboratories where they were experimenting with biological warfare. Not only were they experimenting with biological warfare, though, they were also grabbing, testing, sampling, and analyzing viruses, bacteria, fungus, and other things. In 1991, Sam Nunn, senator from Georgia, and Richard Lugar, senator from Indiana, came up with the Soviet Nuclear Threat Reduction Act of 1991. It's called the Nunn-Lugar Act. And one of the things that they would do is that the United States, because the Soviet Union's gone, these countries are no longer Russian, they're gaining their independence, including Ukraine. What's going to happen to the Soviet bioweapons labs? What's going to happen to them? Well, what's going to happen to them is they're going to fall into malicious hands or other things. So the U.S. agreed that they would go help those countries that are now independent countries take over the bioweapons labs and the biolabs. They're not all for biological weapons. Some were to study bacteria and stuff, and would help them either wind them down or consolidate them to continue the research, not on weapons, but on diseases. So in August 29, 2005, the United States signed a treaty, a nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons proliferation agreement between the United States of America and Ukraine, pursuant to the Nunn-Lugar Act and various other congressional acts regarding proliferation. The agreement was between the Department of Defense of the United States and the Ministry of Health of Ukraine concerning cooperation in the area of prevention of proliferation of technology, pathogens, and expertise that could be used in the development of biological weapons. Now, so what happens, and this is where we get into the Russian disinformation that the QAnon people are grabbing hold of and spreading through the internet. It's getting to reasonable people. There are rabbit holes they can go down. There are links they can follow, and it looks reasonable. There is a tick. You know, ticks spread a whole lot of diseases. There is a tick in Ukraine that infects pigs. And do you know what it gives them? Anthrax. So, of course, there is anthrax in the biolabs. They are studying it. They are studying tick-borne transmission. It's one of those things. You know what else is in these labs? Antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis. Why? The reason the labs were never shut down but continued is because Ukraine has one of the highest rates of tuberculosis in the Western world. In fact, it has the highest rate in Europe. So we are studying tuberculosis. Now, let me ask you a question. Serious question. Would you prefer it if the United States brings the tuberculosis strains that are resistant to all treatment back to the United States, or leave them where they found them in Ukraine to study them? Our public health experts have said, let's leave them in Ukraine and study them there. Now, last summer, as Russia began to make claims on Ukrainian territory, the Putin regime began to push out talking points on social media accounts and others, claiming that the United States was helping Ukraine produce biological warfare to eventually use against Russia. They also began to claim last summer that the United States was developing anthrax at these Ukrainian biolabs. Now, there's a truth here. The United States was processing and looking at the anthrax strains, everyone admits it, that were coming from these ticks in Ukraine and infecting Ukrainian herds. We were not, however, like the Russians saying, doing the next step of refining the anthrax for biological warfare. We were certainly separating the anthrax from all the other pathogens in the ticks, but we were not refining it. So what the Russians did is they took the truth that, yes, we were looking at and processing anthrax at these biolabs in Ukraine. And then they took the next step and say, well, we were refining it. Well, we're not actually refining it. There's a technical difference. When you have a tick that has a bunch of pathogens within it, and we're separating the anthrax from all the others so we can analyze this anthrax. Where is it coming from? How do we treat it? How can we fight it? How can we help the pigs? You're not refining it, but you're certainly separating it. But the Russians do that. Say, oh, it must be weapons. Must be weapons. And a number of Russian propaganda accounts on the internet started pushing this stuff out. Well, when Twitter deleted the accounts, the conspiracy theorists said, oh, it must have been the truth. That's why they deleted the accounts. And each little step along the way added to it. Now, there was testimony the other week, and this has been seized on by the conspiracy theorists. What was her name? Victoria Nyland. She's with the State Department talking about the biolabs in Ukraine. And they deny that they are bioweapons laboratories. Well, they used to be bioweapons laboratories. They were the bioweapon laboratories of the Soviet Union. We have downgraded their capacities. They're not there to make biological weapons. However, scientists have been studying what the Soviets had been doing with biological warfare. They never wound them down. Now, this is one of the diplomatic reasons why the United States sounds so nebulous in this. And it's the nebulosity, the unwillingness to be clear and distinct. If you read the Nunn-Lugar legislation, we were supposed to be winding down these facilities, and they still exist. If you listen to the diplomats, including Victoria Nyland, she wants to deny that we are in charge of these facilities. Because if we were in charge of the facilities under the Nunn-Lugar law, we would need to be winding them down. So we provide support and assistance so that we can continue to study both what the Soviets did back in the day, but also all the new strains of viruses and bacteria that are out there. This is really important here. Ukraine is the world's breadbasket, not just Europe's breadbasket. More than a third of the wheat produced in the world for sale on the open market comes from Ukraine. There are funguses that get into that wheat and deteriorate the wheat crop. If the funguses are successful, the world will starve, not just Ukraine. So we have continued to help fund and continued to maintain these laboratories so that we can study these things that are cropping up to ensure the safety of the food supply, the safety of agriculture, and the safety of people. Remember, antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis is a really bad and deadly thing, and there's a lot of it in Ukraine, and we do need to study it. But we're not in charge. We're not in charge, because if we were in charge under the treaty language, we would need to be winding these things down. So we just assist Ukraine. It's a technical term. Now, there are people out there like Tucker Carlson who quibble with these things, and they just want to ask questions. And I really believe Tucker's asking the questions the way he's asking is because he no longer believes anybody in government. Tucker Carlson was very big on the Iraq war, got sold a bag of goods on weapons of mass destruction, realized everybody lied, and now he went from trust but verify to don't trust and verify. And he's now become an isolationist. He doesn't want us involved anywhere, and he raises these issues and suggests that maybe things are more complicated than they appear, and the best way forward is for us to get out of all of it. Unfortunately, there is a conspiracy theorist element of groupies who like Tucker Carlson, and they aren't smart enough to hear Tucker as suggesting isolation. They hear him sounding pro-Putin. And so they glom on to the pro-Putin talking points and make mountains out of molehills. They really believe the United States is running bioweapons laboratories. What is notable here is that Vladimir Putin made his case for the invasion of Ukraine weeks ago. And he never, ever, ever raised the issue of bioweapons labs. That was never an issue. And now suddenly the Russians might be getting close to or taking some of these labs. And suddenly it's become a retconned cause of war. So that's why the Russians invaded Ukraine. Don't pay any attention to all the prior stuff Vladimir Putin said. Just pay attention to the new stuff that he's saying and retcon it, make it retroactive. That's actually the reason why. Nobody raised the biolabs issue until Victoria Nyland was asked in congressional testimony, were they concerned about it? And yes, we were. We were obviously concerned that if the Russians go in and they smash open the vials of antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis, they could be spreading tuberculosis across the Western world. We're concerned about the anthrax strains that have been found in swine there. We don't want them to refine it. We don't want them to get their hands on old Soviet bioweapons. All of these sorts of things. And now the conspiracy theorists are, of course, screw the United States. That's why they're doing it. Putin's the good guy here. Notice how many of your fellow American conspiracy theorists have taken the pro-Putin, blame America, he's totally justified doing this stuff. And what they're doing is they're twisting truths and adding additional information that's not in the record to try to make the case. Everything I've told you is documented. The Nunn-Lugar treaties, the American assistance, the search and resolve for anthrax, the data on tuberculosis, the fungal constraints on the wheat crop of Ukraine. All of these things are there. And they're taking each of these things and they're twisting them ever so slightly as Putin propagandists. Because these people have decided they really hate their own country, the United States of America. And they're trying to give justification for Putin. Tucker Carlson's an isolationist. Tucker Carlson is not pro-Putin. Tucker Carlson has raised a lot of concerns about a lot of the misstatements of the American establishment. He's become very anti-establishment. And frankly, a lot of the American people involved in this have not helped themselves, including Dr. Fauci. A lot of people are skeptical of Dr. Fauci now. But these conspiracy theorists aren't as smart as Tucker Carlson, and I think they've misinterpreted Tucker's isolationism for being pro-Putin, and they've become pro-Putin. The reality is there are biolabs in Ukraine. We do not run them. We provide assistance. It's a technicality based on treaty language, and it's to study the fungus, the mildew, the mold, the bacteria, the viruses, and even the old Soviet bioweapons that are there to see what they do and can we provide antidotes and cures. There's nothing really sinister about it unless you have a sinister mind. But then that's on you. It's not on reality.